Excellent. I hope you can all hear me. Welcome everyone to the TEL SIG webinar. My name is Neda and I am the head librarian at the Auckland Institute of Studies. We hope that this session will inspire you and give you some really great ideas in terms of professional career paths and also the future directions in tertiary librarianship. Today, we welcome our distinguished guests that we will be introducing very soon, and also our colleagues from the TEL SIG committee at LIANZA as well. So I'm passing it on to my colleague Marisa with the opening karakia. Marisa?
Kia ora, Neda. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry guys. Jess, are you recording this?
Yes, I am.
Oh, thank you. I didn't.
Fabulous. Ko tēnei te wā ki te whakatūwhera I te hui nei, ke inoi tātou. Whakataka te hau ki te uru. Whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina kina ki uta. Kia mā taratara ki tai. E hi ake ana te atākura. He tio, he huka, he hauhu. Tihei Māori ora.
Thank you very much, Marisa. Hi, everyone. I'm Mojgan and I work at Massey University in Palmerston North. I have the pleasure of co-hosting this event with Neda. Just quickly going through the Zoom etiquette. As you know, could I please ask everyone to keep your microphones on mute until it's question times, and you'll be asked to unmute your microphone. Also throughout the presentations, feel free to pop in any questions you have in the chat. I will try to monitor the chat and then we can ask the questions at the end of each presentation. However, if we have too many questions, we might hold on to some and then ask them at the end of all presentations to make sure that we're not taking the presenter's time. Also, if you can pop in your name and the library that you're working at in the chat section, that would be great because LIANZA then will have a record of all the attendees. Now, our first speaker for today is Kim Tairi, and I have the pleasure of introducing her, not that she needs any. I met Kim first when I attended LIANZA conference in 2015, and she was one of the guest speakers. I think at the time she was still working in Melbourne or just moving here. I remember you talking about it, and I was interested because I just moved from Melbourne at the time. I have to admit, before I was drawn to Kim's great speech, I was fascinated by her David Bowie's inspired outfit. That blue suit just was just amazing. Kim has got 20 years experience in tertiary libraries, a lot of it in Australia, and currently is the university librarian at AUT. Apart from being a talented librarian, she's an avid Twitter user, as a bit of Google search shows. And to my, I do believe that she's also a fashion icon. So welcome, Kim, and thank you for accepting to be our presenter. The microphone's yours.
Tina koutou, tina koutou, tina tātou katoa. Ngā mihi nui ki a koutou. I just want to mihi to both Brian and Kat. It's a pleasure to be on a panel with both of you. And also thanks very much to the organisers of today's session. So ko wai koe, ko Kim Tairi, tōku ingoa, no Waikato, oku tupuna, ke te noho au ki te puku o Tamaki e nai nei. Nō reira, tīnā koutou, tīnā koutou, tīnā koutou katoa. So I'm just going to share my screen with you all, so bear with me. So the purpose of this presentation, and I've got a very short amount of time to sum up, 25 plus years in the profession, is to share with you my lived experience as an Indigenous intersectional feminist in higher education who happens to lead a university library. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how that manifests and some of the challenges that we are facing at the moment. So I'm many things. My identity is quite complex. I'm a mother, I'm a daughter, I'm a big sister, I'm a friend, I'm also Māori and an intersectional feminist, and I'm a maker and an artist. My mahi is as the kaitoha puka ki te wānanga aranui o Tamaki Makaurau, the AUT University Librarian. I see my work as university librarian as inherently political, and that's because universities are quite political organisations. They're very competitive in terms of resource, particularly in this climate, and a lot of my job is about whakawhanaungatanga. It's about relationship building and collaborating with other senior leaders in the university to lift up our mahi, our work as the library, and be an advocate for all that we do. And really the best way to get things done in a university is to have allies and partners to work with to make things happen. I believe as a profession, we really do work for the betterment of society. We are a social good and we have a really important function in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I chose to come and work at AUT, and a lot of people have heard this kōrero before, but I wanted to work in an organisation whose values aligned with my own. So it's about tika, pono and aroha, and my own values as an Indigenous woman and a feminist, which are really important to me. As far as my career goes, I seem to have made an intentional decision to stay in tertiary education. I think I've been a bit typecast, and probably at the beginning of my career was a bit risk adverse in terms of moving around the different sectors. And I'm always really envious of those that have worked in publics and specials and other libraries, whereas I've always worked in the tertiary sector, and that has its pros and cons. As far as education goes, I started as a library technician in training, which is a paraprofessional qualification in Ahitereiria. I qualified as a librarian in the year 2000, when you could still do librarianship as an undergraduate degree in Australia, which is getting harder and harder to do. And then instead of doing a master's in library and information service, I chose to do a master's in tertiary education. And that's because I thought that for my mahi, because I work in a university, that was a really good alignment for me. And along your career path, you'll need to make decisions about which direction to go in and which things are going to give you a good foundation for where you want to be. So as you can see, I've worked in a number of roles across universities and TAFEs. I've actually had quite a traditional trajectory as far as career development's gone. I started as a subject liaison, moved into managing campuses, and then functions, and then multiple functions until I became a university librarian. And along the way, I've also done leadership courses. I'm an Auroran. I also did the New Zealand Women in Leadership course, which is great if you get the opportunity and work in universities and polytechnics. It's a really great course to go on. And I very much see myself as a lifelong learner. I do have professional registration and keep that up to date. I think it's really important to keep our knowledge and skills relevant. So how does that all manifest as a leader? There are certain kaupapa or things that I'm particularly interested in my mahi or work. And I'm really proud of the work that AUT Library continues to do in the open scholarship arena. Our scholarly communications team are thought leaders in this space and in this work. And we have a kaupapa around lifting up Indigenous voices and scholarship, and I'm really proud of that. We've also done some research into equity of access and removing barriers for Indigenous students, for Māori students, and for Pacifica students, and other minorities. That is a really important kaupapa for me. We're doing some work across the university around honouring te tiriti o Waitangi. I'm working with other senior leaders in the university on a piece around how do you develop the leaders across the university with a knowledges around te ao Māori, Mautaranga Māori, tikanga, and how does that we put te tiriti at the centre of all that we do in the university, which is really exciting. And then the other thing, I mentioned my feminism. I'm really interested in how we can support women when they're emerging and they're interested in leadership in both the profession and in higher education. There still continues to be a gender pay gap. Promotion can be quite tricky for women within higher education, particularly for the academics. So there's still a lot of mahi to be done in that space. And then, although I have recently started my journey in te ao Māori and Mautaranga Māori and Te Reo, it's really important for my journey and for the library's journey in terms of visibility around being a Indigenous Māori leader. And then we try really, really hard in the library to live those values of tika, pono, mea aroha, and particularly over the last couple of years, it's been a really challenging environment in the pandemic for all of us. And I think I just wanted to touch on briefly, and I won't talk about it much, but as a Māori woman, growing up in Aotearoa, excuse me, internalized racism is a thing, and feeling good enough is something that a lot of Māori struggle with. Sorry, I've practiced this many times and I tear up every time I mention it. So the challenges that we face. COVID-19 and the pandemic has definitely had an impact on the sector, and we're working in an environment that is facing lots of challenges. We miss our international students dearly. Everybody's enrolments have gone up for domestic students, but we have less money coming into the universities at the moment. We're also grappling with blended service. I mean, a lot of the time we talk about it being binary, online versus face-to-face, and it's definitely not a binary thing. Certainly for AUT, we're in that blended space, and how you do both well is a challenge for us. We're about to kick off some work around discovery and the future of the library management system. So watch the space, it's going to be really exciting. And across Aotearoa, we're all grappling in academic libraries with decolonisation of ourselves, of teaching and research. And I know that University of Waikato University of Auckland, Otago and Massey, all of us are starting mahi and work in this space. And it's complex, particularly when you work in very colonised organisations. We're really excited about a new learning management system, which is really exciting for us. We've just, we're in an implementation project for Canvas, which means that we're doing a whole lot of curriculum refreshes and course refreshes, which is exciting, particularly for our learning advisors and our subject liaison staff. We're working in that information literacy and academic literacy space and academic integrity to work and partner with our academics and our learning designers to embed those things into the curriculum. And it's very much a new project that is just kicking off, so that's an exciting thing to be doing. And then I guess the big thing for us all at the moment is how we keep doing our best or better with less staff. So we have lots of challenges, but it's also, particularly at AUT, are really exciting things because lots of things are happening. So that's a very quick overview of my career path. And I just wanted to leave plenty of time for questions, essentially, and sort of throw those challenges out to spark some discussion in the little bit of time that we have left. This photo is from Rangiriri, who some of you might be familiar with. It was one of the battlefields during the Waikato land wars. And this is my cousins and some of my uncles walking up to hear about our whakapapa and our tupuna who were on that battlefield. And these battles kicked off massive land confiscations throughout the Waikato region. And I just thought I'd share it with you because this is part of who I am and what I bring to my role and job in higher education. So, ngā mihi nui ki a koutou katoa. Thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Kim. That was inspiring. And I was short, so I have to have you guys at some stage for a whole full presentation. I've got one question so far on the chat, but we can open the floor as well and people can just unmute themselves and ask. So question for Kim from Adrian. Do you think there are opportunities for future collaboration across Tamaki, Makarua, excuse my pronunciation if I'm wrong, tertiary institution libraries?
It's interesting because we're actually looking at trying to share a job across two universities at the moment and to make that collaboration a real thing in terms of like sharing staff. And I would love to be able to do that. So that's a really great way to be able to bring institutions together. You know what, I think libraries and librarians are really good at collaboration. And I know that all of you belong to committees that work across tertiary organisations. And some of the best work that we've done has been in that way. I mean, there are wonderful communities of practice that exist, and the open access community practice, for example, springs to mind. And then there's the digital literacy crew that are doing work around digital literacy. And I think that it is really something that we value and something that we need to keep doing. So thanks very much for the question, Adrian.
Thank you. We might have time for one quick question before we move on to the next presenter, and then we can ask more at the end. Feel free to undo your microphone if you have any questions.
Kia ora, Kim. Philip here. Thank you for the presentation. Just in terms of doing more or better with less, I'm just interested in what library assistants do at AUT, because I feel sometimes they can be a vastly underutilized staffing resource. Yeah, so do they have roles that allow them to do other than desk work?
So our library staff are also involved in chat. We are doing things like, at the moment, we're playing around with our model at AUT, where we're looking at other ways of doing that desk delivery, that front-to-front service, that front of house service. So we're experimenting with things like extended chat hours. We're experimenting with, you know, roving kind of things. A lot of our staff also do things like they are supporting our document delivery team. And I agree with you, it's a role that is changing, but it's how we make that role meaningful for people that are working in those frontline jobs. And for a lot of our community, they are the face of the library, because they're the ones that they see the most when they come in into our physical spaces, and who they are chatting with. So it's really important to think about how those jobs can be done meaningfully. The way we're approaching it is we're actually doing a co-design kind of project. So those people that are doing that mahi have come up with a whole lot of things that they want to trial, and then we'll work out what kind of model we'll put in place based on, you know, evaluation. We're doing some user experience work, some testing, talking to students and other stakeholders in that service before we rush into anything. So watch the space. Hopefully we come up with something that works really well. I'm sure we will.
There's one more question, but we might leave it for the end of the presentation, so we're not getting to other people's presentations. Neda, up to you.
Great. Thank you, everyone. I can see a few questions coming through the chat, and we hope we will address those towards the end. If not, we will just pass them on in an email to our guests, and they can reply to you directly. I think that's one of the ways. I would like to introduce our guest, Brian Flaherty, my dear colleague from University of Auckland. Brian's career has spanned for over 25 years at University of Auckland, and Brian's been one of the pioneers in the digitalization of the library itself, from building the very first university library website to running and managing some of the most progressive and projects in the digital world of the academic library. Brian is currently with NeSI and in his new role, and I believe that Brian will introduce some of the interesting projects he's been working on. I understand he's in a role that's also developing and growing as well, and ties very nicely with his librarianship background in librarianship. So Brian, over to you and welcome.
Thank you, Neda. Kia ora tātou. Let me just share a screen to get started before I talk. Right. Okay. It's a real pleasure to be sharing the virtual stage with Kim and Kat. I'm delighted to be here doing that. Let me just drag that over there. That's better. It's an interesting topic. This webinar. I like the phrase "get ready for the westerly and be prepared for the southerly." My career has it's not really been about facing adversity, which is the topic of this webinar. It's been more about serendipity, I think, and the extraordinary changes in our profession over my career. So I want to talk about the opportunities that were provided by that serendipity and the changes. I've thrown a few images together in a PowerPoint, and I'll talk to some of those as I go along. I'll start with a story. So it was 1992. My girlfriend Annie and I had spent a lot of the 80s bumming around the world, really, and we came home in 1992 to do some serious grown-up things finally, which was house and mortgage, babies, and first serious jobs. So mine was at the University of Auckland as an overseas interloans librarian. Annie, interestingly enough, she got a job at AUT Library in 1992. Like Annie, I wasn't very good at my job. I was a slow learner and spent half my time apologizing to my boss. As you can see, the library there was still with all the catalogue drawers. Anyway, one day I was shown something on the department's single computer, an old 386, and I used to always hate computers. But that evening I went home to Annie, and over dinner I said to her, you know, I've discovered this new thing at work today, and I think it could be really important. And it's called the internet. I don't intend to be have this as a sad old librarian reminiscence, but there are really three areas of opportunity that I've seen opened up to libraries in my career, and they've been pivotal, I think, to the changes in libraries over that time. For myself, I went from an overseas interloans librarian to a job as an electronic resources librarian, right through to an associate university librarian for digital services. The first of those three opportunities that I wanted to just briefly mention was that internet thing. And in the 1990s, we trendy librarians called it the internet superhighway. It's pretty weird now. But I started building websites, as Nada said. As you can see there, the early ones from 1996 through to getting a little bit more sophisticated, through to the point where I realized that really DIY wasn't good enough for libraries and we needed to employ web developers and designers. One thing that's always fascinated me about libraries and I've been curious about is I love the idea of libraries as laboratories of discovery. So I'm be interested, Kim, to hear about your work in changing library management systems and discovery, because I think it's really a never-ending process and a job for libraries to continue to develop our front ends, how people discover and access and use our services. When I was at the University of Auckland Library, that involved in the end, at the most sophisticated level, building our own front end on top of a catalogue and commercial discovery services and harvesting metadata from local and institutional collections, which I found fascinating. The second opportunity, I think, for myself and for libraries was starting digitization and mass digitization, opening up our libraries and institutions, print and analog collections for research and teaching. So at the University of Auckland, that involved digitizing things like some iconic journals, the school journal, the feminist journal broadsheet, the Journal of the Polynesian Society, I think, which was probably the key one we digitized, really because it opened up for peoples of the Pacific as well as Māori some of their heritage that they hadn't had access to. We used to get letters from people in the Pacific saying, thank you so much, now I've discovered some of my whakapapa and history of my people, and even families that are in the JPS. One thing I want to mention about all that digitization was risk management, not compliance, and I think libraries, we've been fairly hesitant about digitizing in some ways, but you know, really no libraries ever that I'm aware of has ever been taken to court over copyright, and if we were, the worst that would happen will be a takedown notice. So I think we need to keep sticking at that digitization and take a few risks. The other thing about digitization that we started doing but haven't really done in New Zealand as much as we should, which is enabling digital collections for research. increasingly for artificial intelligence, text mining and machine learning, building the corpus, which is what this early New Zealand books collection was about, building a corpus of 19th century texts. I put a little plug for something we developed in the early 2000s with Michelle Leggett, which was the New Zealand Electronic Poetry Centre. Hundreds of recordings, thousands of poems, archives, a peer-reviewed journal, and Pacifica Poets. And NZEPC is probably looking for a new home soon. If you've never been there, please dip in and have a look. There's also the opportunity with digital things of building networks around the university, which is, for the last, I think, 10 years I was at the university, it was about drawing the orphan collections around the university under our wing. The first one of those we did was the university art collection of building a database and a front end. Fascinating thing that we did was with the Chapman Archive, which had started in the 60s as a political studies recordings from radio, and went on. I think that Helen Clark was one of the students who used to record from the radio. In the 80s, it became TV as well. When it was an orphan, we picked it up in the library and grew it into a TV and radio service with mass digitization and digital capture. Now it's got over 100,000 hours of TV and radio dating back to the 60s that's streaming and fully available. Another taonga was the archive of Māori and Pacific music, or sound as it is now, which is a beautiful taonga for New Zealand and the Pacific of recordings that's being large-scale digitization. And last thing around digitization I wanted to mention was the project with the School of Environment around digitizing New Zealand government map series back to the 19th century, and then combining them with geospatial resources to openly available geodata hub that was built and is still in existence. The third opportunity I want to talk about is around the library's involvement in working into the research life cycle, and where are the points that we can intersect with the researchers. For my part, the things I've been involved in was institutional repositories, the first research information management system after a visit to Imperial College in the mid-2000s and hooking up with Symplectic. Data repositories. I hooked up with Laurie Huck in Canberra once and invited her to New Zealand to talk about orchids, and we built the first orchid service in New Zealand, and eventually the New Zealand Orchid Hub. The National DOI Consortium, the Digital Object Repository, and it's something that's kind of got a little bit forgotten about, which is a CONSORF Research Data Management Framework report from 2016 with Max Wilkinson, something that I am quite proud of involvement with several research librarians. I also like to acknowledge the really smart people that I work with over the years at the library. It's great to work with people who are a lot smarter than yourself. I think that's been one of the keys of my career, including this smart woman, if you can recognize her there with the nose and the hat on, who was my boss for 20 years and who was in equal parts challenging and supporting. This was at the California Digital Library. We visited there once on Halloween, and they managed to get her to dress up. 3 years ago, or 2.5 years ago, I was made redundant. I won't go into why it happened, but it was a major restructuring in the library and major budget cuts. But it was an interesting time for me to think about what skills I had and how transferable they were, and whether I was institutionalized or not. So I got a job offer from NeSI, the New Zealand eScience infrastructure. I don't know if you know much about them, but they really provide supercomputing for all of the universities and the CRIs in New Zealand. You can see there some of the kit that we have, the high performance computing platforms. On the left is Mahawika, in the middle is Maui, and on the right is some of the storage. As well as high performance computing, NeSI have been getting into data services, and my role's around developing products around data. One of those has been development of a national data transfer platform with a number of nodes around the country where we're able to move big data about 1,000 times faster than the broadband internet. And we've been growing that network in New Zealand with a company called Globus. And you can see some of our stats from last year there. It's all very well for researchers to create data, but they have to share it. They have to send it to compute resources, and that can be really slow. Globus, the company we worked for, have just transferred the 1 exabyte of data since they've been in existence. So it's a massive data on a global scale. Where are the times? So I'll wrap up with a couple other things that are of interest. One is working with Kakapo. Really, it's about building a repository with a group, Genomics Aotearoa, of all the genomes of the taonga species in New Zealand. Quite complex metadata involved in various hierarchies, but also something you may have interested in, traditional knowledge labels, which I won't go into, but really it's around how communities are able to express local conditions, and particularly in New Zealand and iwi, around tikanga, around access to resources. Traditional knowledge labels I'd recommend having a look at, and people like Maui Hudson and Waikato have done quite a lot to develop those. And the last thing I wanted to mention was a project back with the university around designing a research data management framework. So we're looking at the university becoming a Māori data sovereignty organisation, looking at research code of conducts, data classification, and within the ecosystem, looking at building the data registries, machine actionable data management plans, new persistent identifiers around research activity, building safe environments for sensitive data. We've done a stock take. We've partway through looking at a business plan and around our options for the university. And as part of that, we haven't released it yet, but we've developed a maturity model for data management. There are a number of models around the world, but this one I think is unique in that it incorporates Māori data sovereignty into a maturity model for data for the university. And goes into some depth. This the intro page around levels of maturity for Māori data sovereignty and the different sorts of data. And I think I'll wrap it up there, but with some quick bullet points. The things that I've learned is to question everything. Everything's up in the air in libraries. Why we do things, question everything. Volunteer for shit. Build your networks, including your professional ones. Stay curious. You can't do professional reading at work. Find out about things like traditional knowledge labels. Researchers find out about FAIR for machine learning, about data versioning. If you're dealing with researchers who are doing genomics or astrophysics, find out about that stuff. And lastly, take some risks. I think in your personal life and your professional life, hire someone risky who could challenge you. My last piece of advice is around the fact that alcohol and librarians are a good mix. I think that a lot of what I've learned has been for evening drinks with people. People like Roy Tennant, Bill McNaught, Paul Sutherland. Sometimes you don't remember what you were talking about the evening before and the problems you've solved, but certainly a good lubricant. And that's enough from me, I think. I'd like to hear what Kat has to say. I don't know if there's time for any question.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's no time for question at this point. There are a couple of comments on the chat, so Brian, please feel free to respond if you want. We might just move to the next presenter, and then if we have enough time at the end, we'll take some questions. So our final presenter for today is our Massey's own Kat Cuttriss. Kat has got 17 years or about library experience, mainly in management and senior leadership positions. We're very lucky to have Kat here as our Associate University Librarian, as she brings a wealth of knowledge and experience with her. Above all, she is a compassionate leader, and in the 7 months that she's been here, has already made her place in our hearts. Kat, please have the floor.
Oh, bless you. Thank you so much, Mojgan. Kura koutou katoa. Ko waitete te awa no o te poti a hao, ko Cuttriss toko whanau, ko cat toko ingoa. No ia, talofa lava ni sabula banaka. And I really want to tatuku Kim and Brian and just acknowledge how wonderful it is to be in this company and part of this panel and sharing with you some of my insights and experiences today. Now I'm going to do a screen share at this point, which might unhelpfully show you what's coming up in the next slide as opposed to what I actually want to show you at a point in time, but never mind, we'll just see how we go. That there, and it's done just what I hoped it wouldn't. So I'm just going to roll with that and hope that you can just see one slide at a time. Perhaps a nod from someone like Modgkin, if you can just see one slide at the moment.
No, I can see the next slide.
Never mind.
That's
Okay,
all right.
That's all right. You'll know what's coming next at any point. So I would like to start with an image that you can already see from Victoria University Library, where I worked with marketing colleagues on it's part of a workforce development plan, a major piece of work. And one element of that was to produce a suite of recruitment videos to promote to prospective candidates who might be interested in joining Victoria University Library. Now, Ivy, I know you're here and I know that you were involved in this initiative, but we asked our colleagues, our library staff, what sort of background do current library staff have? What do people most enjoy about working at the library? And we asked what sort of work do people do at the library? And this screenshot just encapsulates for me how on earth to sum up the amazing mahi that we are so lucky enough to be a part of. How can you possibly hope to convey in a few short sound bites, you know, the significance, the joy, the interest and the meaning of the work, where our input makes a really tangible and positive difference to people's lives. So I wanted to start with that as a kind of a, you know, an all-in-one sum up, but also an example of a quite interesting project that I was lucky enough to be part of. Now, in terms of my career adventures, I have moved through a number of sectors and settings, tertiary, specials, public libraries, a stint in academia as well at Victoria University, and just referencing Brian's comment about transferable skills and the ability, I suppose, to develop them, but also then to apply them, to be able to take those skill sets into vastly different settings. Though I would note, underpinning them all is such an important shared ethos. And Kim spoke to this so beautifully around social good, around the betterment of society. I don't think it matters what particular environment we're in. That is essentially what our work enables. I'd also like to just note that alignment Kim mentioned around your personal values and the alignment to the values of the institution in which you work and how important that can be as well. I'd have to say I've been kind of lucky and had amazing opportunities arise at sometimes very unexpected and sometimes very inconvenient times, much more than anything particularly planned or systematic. And again, to Tatuku, Kim and Brian around leaders and mentors who have just played such a crucial part and guided and inspired and really shaped me along the way. I was going to do a carousel of all of them, starting with Isla Little at the University of Otago, and coming to the current day with Linda Palmer, who is just behind the wall behind me there. But it would just take the next 15 minutes to do it justice. So we'll just have to acknowledge them. There's many of them. Now I'm going to do a slightly indulgent journey, if you like, and share with you kind of some of the innovative projects, exciting and joyful initiatives that I've been so lucky enough to be involved with over the last handful of years. I already talked about the workplace development initiative at Victoria University. I'll talk about book facing, about community co-design, and about spatial refurbishments as well. But I guess what I want to note is, as I was reflecting on this list, it's really that collision of people and ideas and spaces and creativity that for me is a magic formula. And I might just note the mention of adversity in the session title, and say that it's kind of through the experience of working together with people in these sorts of opportunities that you build the kind of relationships that I would argue kind of see you through any form of adversity that you may face. I think he tangata make all the difference. So without further ado, a screen of nothing. So book facing at Massey University. Now this was back in 2013, and the team there came up with the idea that was just starting to get a bit of momentum across the world, actually, as a way both to promote our collection and highlight the resources that we had in our library, but also to engage with our student and staff cohort and to really spark interest and awareness and excitement about our library and its services. So we launched a competition, and those are all staff images on the slide there, to kind of generate a bit of excitement and buy-in. So it was one of the competition entries. That was me, I think. And that was another entry. And then here I am at kind of the presentation of the award point. But what's really quite neat about the way that we promoted the competition was we were in the middle of a building project, which I'll come to in a moment. And we used the building hoardings as a display backdrop for all these beautiful staff images. So a lot of fun. And what I would say about these types of ideas, I suppose, is they're so very doable. You can do them in pretty much any context or setting, arguably across the GLAM sector. And we've actually seen, I'm thinking about Invercargill Public Library, City Library with the Keeping Up with the Librarians, seen some really kind of funky, quirky and very creative marketing ideas in the recent past. And my next example is actually from a public library setting, but again, one that applies to any context when you're really wanting to create services or experiences or spatial layouts or anything that relates directly to your customer base, and have them involved in a co-design and a co-creation way. Now, in the example of Hutt City Libraries, what we wanted to co-create there was our library strategy and future vision with our community, quite crucially. Rather than develop something in-house ourselves and then take it to people and test it with them, we wanted to actually start with a blank canvas and build it together from the ground up. So we, library staff, we got out and about on the streets of Lower Hutt, blessed with quite a sunny day that day. I think you can see that's the Douse Museum and behind one of the pictures there. And we just took some time to kōrero with anyone that we found. And what we wanted to understand was, what's your future ideal library experience? And so on the screen here are the some of the people that we spoke with. Now we took that back to the workshop and we started mapping out personas based on the insights we'd gleaned to help us really understand the types of experiences that our communities were wanting. From these insights, we did some quickfire prototyping of the types of spaces in our libraries that our communities indicated that they wanted to experience. And I might just draw any Massey colleagues in the room, might just draw your attention to some of those design features which were highlighted. So flexibility, mobile and portable layouts, but also the need for sanctuary. And this segues quite neatly onto my final example, which is from Massey Wellington campus, and a fairly major spatial refurbishment that we had at that library in 2013 to 14. Again, design principles really focused on mahitahi and co-creation with our clients to create very welcoming, very intuitive, very user-friendly, accessible spaces. And so this is a wee shot of the journey mapping workshop that we did with a sample of library clients. And this example is the browser user. And so what will they do? What will they think? What will they feel as they move through library spaces looking for, you know, meeting particular needs. Now we translated these findings into spatial environments that would really make sense and be intuitive for a whole variety of activities. This example is macro and micro wayfinding using range ends for macro, and actually ironically using typography, those macro range ends, and then the in-shelf GUI dividers as well. This picture shows the use of colour. So it's quite a complex layout in terms of how the spaces knitted together, or rather didn't. And so we use this really bright sort of arterial connecting colour to show where the lift and the stairs were, and then surface treatments to show what was intended in each kind of zone. So in this instance, rubber flooring on the left there is about high activity, high interaction, and that was the types of behaviours, I suppose, that we were trying to encourage in those spaces. And also lighting treatment. So in this instance, looking at how to connect people through kind of the central core of the building and the lift shaft through to where a major part of the collection was. We use this really strong long beam of light to draw people through. And finally, not quite finally, penultimately, we had this beautiful use of light to create a sense of enclosure. These are the quiet reflective study tables, Nawaka, you know, nestled within the collection. The way that that name came to bear was quite beautiful. It was from the builders who mounted those acoustic panels, and they noted that their inverted shape looked like a waka, and that's where, you know, where that name came from, which was quite special. So ultimately, we really consciously wanted an environment that evoked manakitanga, that was welcoming, that was intuitive. And for that reason, we didn't want a lot of signs. We didn't want prescriptive rules about who and how could use the spaces. So in that vein, we created very much a one language lexicon of wayfinding items, which were small in number and which were either te reo or English, but not both. And so that's just an example from one of the stairwell walls. So that's a bit of a snapshot, I suppose, of some of the really exciting projects that I've been lucky enough to be involved with. I would like to finish though by noting how much joy I get from the coalface and getting that connection back to customers, back to client base, back to that real essential mahi that kind of underpins everything we do. And this example here is me shelving. So this was a public library's visit to the new Martinborough Library in the Wairarapa, and they were hurrying towards opening day and needed help with shelving. So we dived in, and I got really confused. My unintentionally confused faces, because I found it quite difficult. And then this beautiful shot from Hut City with Susanna Markwitz, who's a children and teens librarian there, and story time, and being able to be you know, involved at that front line and supporting that really key elemental service. So thank you. And questions, I think maybe a wrap up on questions, I'm not sure if you want to do for all three, or
I do have lots of comments in the chat, but no questions at this point. Natalie, how we're going with time? Do we have time for a question, or shall we close the session?
Maybe just one, I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
there's one. Yeah.
Yep, a quick question. If anyone wants to undo the microphone and ask. Either Kat or Brian, sort of a question for either of these presenters, or Kim.
Be brave.
Okay, Kat, I'll ask a quick question. What would your advice for anyone in the academic libraries and tertiary libraries, or anyone interested in moving to the tertiary library?
I think I'll just tautuku, I think Brian's one of his final slides, maybe the one with the alcohol, no, the one with the some of those those bits of advice around being really open and being really curious, taking up learning opportunities as and when they strike. Take time as leaders and as followers, I think, to you know, to listen to colleagues and to share ideas and to support each other. Fundamentally, I would say yes, definitely put your hand up and volunteer, but I would also say be judicious with your use of the word yes. I think yes, saying yes, but also just being very aware of how much you're taking on board and how much you can commit to and how much serves you well as colleagues, as well as customers. And yeah, and have fun.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kat. I'd just like to thank all our presenters for taking your time and for dedicating it to this session. And thank you for all of you who have joined us today. It's been absolute pleasure and enormous privilege to be part of this event. I will just close this session with thanks, with just a couple of 1 minute left, and passing on to my colleague Natalie with closing karakia. Thank you all.
Good everybody. So kia ino tātou, whakanoa e tēnei wahi, whakanoa e tēnei korero, whakanoa e tēnei tangata, haumi e, hui e, tai ki e.
Thank you everyone.
Thank you all. Have a good afternoon.
Be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you, Neda. Thank you, Moira. Excellent.
Kia ora, thanks all.